Hello from the Heartland. My name is Jenna, and this is SmartHER News. News when it matters and why it matters. Our SmartHER series features unique people who help us think and live smarter. The headline seems clear. America targeted and killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. But the implications and angles of this story, dynamic to say the least. General Soleimani was known internationally for his leadership of an elite fighting force within Iran's military, the Quds Force, a group designated as a foreign terrorist organization by the U.S. government. Listen to our guest describe the stakes.
The killing of Qasem Soleimani was probably no less consequential for the U.S. and for our foreign policy than the killing of Osama bin Laden or Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. I mean, in other words, just in terms of the sheer amount of blood that this man had on his hands and the kind of misery that he had perpetrated around the region, I don't think just because people had not heard of his name before, they did not realize how important of a target this man was and how important it was for the United States to take him off the battlefield.
That's Jonathan Schanzer, Senior Vice President at the think tank Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He describes Soleimani's strategy as employing a slow strangulation of other countries so Iran could take control. Jonathan has followed Iran and its terrorism footprint for years, and he joins us to provide some much-needed perspective on the bigger picture and why this all matters. We started with a basic question. What exactly does Iran want?
They would like to see the world look very differently than it is. The regime views the United States as what they call the Great Satan. They talk about Western influence, Western culture, American-dominated world order as a threat to their way of life. They would like to promote a revolutionary ideology, one in which Islam reigns supreme, but also, I would say, more of a kind of almost a socialist or communist ideal. The idea is to prop up more violent and radical leadership around the world.
Why? So that's one of the questions that a lot of our audience had about why exactly this Iranian General Soleimani, was in Iraq at all. Can you give us sort of like a big overview of the relationship between Iran and Iraq and what Iran wants in Iraq and why the general would even be on the ground there?
Absolutely. So I think it's actually important to look back to a war that took place between Iran and Iraq in 1980 to 1988. There was a time where these two countries were really at odds with one another. It was under Saddam Hussein as well as the current leadership in Iran. And so they fought for 8 years. There was like 1 million people that died in a brutal, brutal war, and they fought to a stalemate. And there was a sense after that neither side could beat the other and that they were going to have to live in acrimony next to one another, really just bad neighbors. And then comes this momentous occasion where the United States goes in and topples Saddam Hussein. Now, we did it, I think, for virtuous reasons. I think there was a cause for wanting to do it. But when Saddam fell, Iran saw opportunity. And so as we fought the subsequent war in Iraq, as we tried to fight off insurgencies, the Iranians did everything that they could to derail us and to drive us out of Iraq. And when we look at Qasem Soleimani's track record and the blood that he has on his hands, a lot of that has to do with the IEDs, these improvised explosive devices that the Iranians placed all around Iraq, which led to the killing and maiming of hundreds, if not thousands, of American soldiers. This was Iran's goal since we invaded Iraq, which was to basically drive us out of the Middle East. This is what Soleimani's tried to do either directly or through proxies in Iraq. They would like us out, and they would like to control that territory themselves. They're trying to kind of finish that unfinished business from the 1980 to 1988 Iran-Iraq war.
There's also a question that's come from some of our audience about why now? Why target this Iranian general now? And in the current news cycle, everyone's suddenly an expert on General Soleimani. I know you've been following him for a long time. So what is the background that every American should know about this particular individual and what has transpired up until his death? Okay,
so it's a great question. And here's the sort of the shorthand version of this. Qasem Soleimani stepped into the position of running the Quds Force back in the late 1990s. I think it was 1998 when he first stepped in. And ever since that time, he'd been sowing mayhem across the region, including not just attacks on, opposition forces in other countries unrelated to the U.S., but also attacking American allies like Israel, Saudi Arabia, and then, of course, laying these improvised explosive devices and targeting Americans. Now, things got worse after the Iran nuclear deal. We provided the Iranians with roughly $150 billion in cash and sanctions relief, as an inducement to have them sign on to the deal. Well, it should be of no surprise, but the Iranians turned around and started spending that money on even more of Qasem Soleimani's proxy armies, and so they became even more aggressive in the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years. Now, after the Trump administration left the Iran nuclear deal, we began to ratchet up sanctions on Iran, and their way of responding to those sanctions was to strike at American interests across the region. And so you began to see them really, they attacked Saudi Arabia, a major oil facility recently. They harassed ships in the Persian Gulf. And the Trump administration was remarkably consistent. What Trump continued to say was, these things are not a problem, are not a trigger for us to respond to you. You want to attack our allies and our interests, we are going to put more and more sanctions on you, but we are not getting sucked into a war. But he did say, if you touch an American or if you touch American assets, that's our red line. And so last week on Friday, there was the bombing of a base that killed an American contractor. It was carried out by a group called Kataib Hezbollah, one of these proxies that Soleimani commanded. And then after that, they staged a siege of the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. And it was at that point that I think Trump said that was the red line that you just crossed. And rather than striking at a minor target, they took out the guy who ordered these attacks. And that explains how it happened. Trump was actually remarkably consistent. He's not always consistent on a lot of his foreign policies, but on Iran, I would say that the administration showed discipline. This is not an administration that was eager to get involved in the Middle East. If anything, Trump has said that he wants to get out as quickly as possible. But it appears that this administration felt compelled to defend American interests here, and they did with quite a statement.
What do you think is the threat to America, to Americans here at home, based on this decision?
Well, so far the Iranians have threatened to respond. What we've seen so far are proxy attacks in the region, rockets on U.S. bases and the like. The Iranians have said that they plan on only targeting American military assets. That's what they've said so far. However, we also have seen at least one instance of a hacking attempt, or actually a successful hacking of a website associated with the U.S. government over the weekend. So it's possible that we might see, Iran's cyber army activated. That's certainly a possibility. I think the idea that they might attack us here at home right now seems remote. I think it would be suicide, quite frankly, for the regime to do so. And, of course, this is all, I think we just need to be aware of the fact that the president himself has warned the Iranians that if they cross his red line again, that he has 52 targets that he has already identified across Iran where he will unleash attacks on the Iranians. So this could be very destabilizing for them. And that's really the moment where we are right now. This is a standoff. It's very tense. The Iranians are trying to stare down the U.S. Trump is, not flinching. And it'll be interesting to see who moves next.
Quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news, a refuge from the storm. I'm Jenna. Thank you for choosing Smarter.